Hey there. As you know, if you're seeing this video on my channel, I'm Elizabeth from Living Vibrantly, and I have a coaching business focused on helping women reconnect with their bodies through movement and intuitive eating. But this video is really about my story and my journey, more so than how I help people. You know, I usually offer information and tips, but this is really just my story. These videos on my channel have been pretty popular, so it seems like people are curious with how it all works with IVF and now surrogacy. And there's something therapeutic in sharing my story, so that's why I'm doing it. And you know, I had planned on saving this video for a while in the future, you know, like I was not planning to do this tonight. Sorry, my waistband is like bothering me. I'm in kind of tough shape, guys, but I think there's some value in doing this when it's raw and fresh and real and in the moment, and not always, you know, reflecting back after the storm is over. So here we go. So this morning, my husband and I had a Skype consultation with a surrogacy attorney. There are firms that specialize in this, and you know, I guess the cool thing about our virtual world we live in is you don't even have to go in person for things like this anymore. Sean and I sat side by side, and the attorney was in her office. And we talked, and it was pretty much like being together, you know, with webcams. You can see people's facial expressions and everything. And so it was actually a really good experience. I feel better afterwards, but it was a really tough call to get through. I was pretty much crying the entire time. And honestly, you guys, like ever since we started, since 2014, when we started really doing the testing, or maybe it was 2013, like really getting serious about figuring out the cause and treating my/our infertility, I've kind of felt like I don't always know, like most days I don't know if I'll be able to get through the day without crying. And like some days it just feels like nobody talked to me, because if you say one word to me, like if you're nice to me, I'm going to cry. So like that's kind of my daily mode of being for the last 3 to 4 years. And it's been rough. And one day we're going to be on the other side of this, but that's just how it's been. And so sometimes it feels like you're crazy. And if that is how you are feeling, just know that you are not alone. You're not the only one. Nothing unnatural about it. That's it's just a really crazy thing to get used to, feeling that way on a daily basis. And the intensity of the emotions is just unreal, and it's something that I never expected. But it's the new normal for now. So I'm not going to go into too much of the history. There's other videos on, if you're on my, what is it called, our fertility journey, our IVF journey, that playlist. You can go back to the other ones and hear the whole history. But we came to this point because last summer we went through the process of freezing embryos, which is the last video that I made. We went through 2 rounds of IVF. And a lot of people don't know, IVF is only the process up to fertilizing the embryos. And then, you know, so that after IVF, you can either transfer the embryo for hopefully implantation, or you can freeze the embryo. But those are not, like, the IVF process is done. So we did IVF. It doesn't mean you're going to be pregnant necessarily. That's something separate. So I just want people to know that, because if someone says they're doing IVF, you don't necessarily then expect them to be pregnant the following month. You know, that's a whole separate conversation, separate can of worms. So just a note on the terminology. But we went through IVF last summer. hoping that my kidney function would improve to allow me to go forward with pregnancy. So at that point, there would be a frozen embryo transfer, they thought, and put it in your uterus and hope that it sticks. And there's, medications involved and other things that they do to increase your chances. But in the end, it was determined that my body, that I really, I was advised not to take the chance with pregnancy because the additional blood volume, additional circulation to support a growing baby is also hard on your kidneys. And in a healthy person, the kidneys have excess capacity to absorb that. But my kidneys right now are kind of functioning almost well enough to keep just my blood levels normal, because they detoxify everything. So they're not working quite as fast, quite as efficiently. Actually, they're about 40% of a healthy person's kidney function. But remember, people can survive with one kidney. So if I had 50%, maybe my blood levels would be normal. But my blood levels, there's certain markers of like how fast your body is moving out waste products. And so for me, that's still elevated to a point where they felt that it would not be wise to go forward with pregnancy because I could end up back on dialysis. And there was a decent chance of that happening after, the pregnancy would probably be healthy, but then afterwards, ending up on this treatment again is not anything that I ever want to do. It was awful. So, one second. So that was how we landed where we are today. And, part of the issue too is that we have a friend of a friend who's interested in serving as a surrogate for us. And I don't know if it's going to work out. I hope it does, of course, but there are a lot of things that have to line up, which is part of what I'm going to talk about in this video. And so once that idea was floated to us, that's when we really started looking into this. I don't know that we would have otherwise because it's really expensive. But, there's always adoption, foster care. And those are things that we would look at because, there are kids out there that need a loving home. But the fact that we have those embryos frozen, and those can be donated to and things like that. But it's pretty exciting to think about giving it a try with those babies. Our babies on ice is how I refer to them. I don't know. It's kind of ridiculous, but I just think of them like nice and cold, sitting there waiting for us to be ready, just chilling. It's so ridiculous because it's like completely like, I don't know, is it anthropomorphizing if it's a human embryo? I don't know, but these little like, what are they, 4 cells right now? And I kind of feel like those are our babies and we love them already. So it's just some really powerful feelings starting to take hold that are helping to guide our decisions on this. So anyway, I knew next to nothing about surrogacy like a month ago. But even if you know nothing, you know enough to understand that this is not something to be taken lightly and just go into uninformed. There are huge legal issues. I had read about some cases, and we're not looking at anything international, but I mean, this is part of why, that like people had gone to another country for a surrogate, and then, supposedly the laws were like airtight, but then something happened where a judge decided that they weren't going to rule like in accordance with the law, and basically they had a healthy baby that was genetically theirs, but the judge would not permit the family to leave the country. And so they were just stuck there. Like, their baby's there, their baby can't leave, they're not going to leave the baby behind, and they were in limbo. And I don't know what ended up happening, but I'm sure there are plenty of cases where it works out just fine, but don't even want to say inconvenience because it's more than that, but the consequences are just catastrophic if you're the unlucky person that happens to. So, not taking a chance on something like this. So we're looking domestically right now. But the bigger point is I wanted to make sure that we have everything locked down from a legal perspective. The other thing that really scares me so much that it makes me almost not want to do this is the idea of having to agree on what to do in a case of, God forbid, the testing reveals something. Then all of a sudden you have some decisions to make. What if there's a condition that, the baby probably won't survive, things like that. But already those are such heart-wrenching decisions to make between you and your partner, and now having to involve a third party and their morals and values. And so it turns out that there is basically a questionnaire that you all fill out, and you have to be on the same page before they'll allow you to proceed with the surrogate. So if you, the two parties don't agree on that, that's just like a non-starter. So that's one of the things we're going to be working through. All of this we learned in our consultation this morning, which is helping me feel a little more at ease, just because it's known rather than unknown in terms of how it all works. But there is still a lot that has to be figured out before we move forward. But one step at a time, right? So, but I got ahead of myself again. So I just knew that we had to figure out the legal issues. So I was asking around, and there are different support groups on Facebook for IVF, right? So I had been part of one that was really good with just like, how a lot of Facebook groups, you don't always see the best information, and you see things and you're like, I know that's not true. Well, this group always had really good information. So, and I, kind of smallish group, I trusted the people in there. And so asked for a recommendation. That's how we found the law firm that we had the call with this morning. So if you are interested potentially in surrogacy, shoot me an email and I'll share with you the information about the law firm that we're talking to, because they're super professional. The consultation was at no charge, like full hour. She answered all of our questions, so thorough, and just very nice too. Like, this is such an emotionally charged thing. And just to have someone who's like very kind is so helpful in things like this. And she was. So that was how we ended up on the call this morning. Now, I'm not going to say too much about as I go forward with these videos. Like right now we're just getting started, but I'm not going to say much about who the surrogate is or like anything really about my interactions with her, because there's two people involved here, and she's it's not, she has her story that's not mine to tell, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I'll stick to like my perspective and not really bring her into it too much. But we are extremely grateful that should this work out, like that's just awesome. But there's a lot of pieces to consider when you're going into this. So just food for thought, and like the law firm will share a cost estimate that's itemized so you can see what all the costs are involved. But for example, the surrogate has to have health insurance that covers this. So some policies exclude surrogacy. So, they would cover a normal childbirth. It gets very complicated. So the embryo transfer is not covered by my insurance, like doesn't cover any fertility medicine, medicines or treatments. But if her insurance covered it, I don't know. I still don't think it would be covered. It said we had to pay for the transfer out of pocket. So fine, whatever. That's actually like one of the cheaper parts of it. But, then if someone has health insurance, in most cases, prenatal and the birth itself would be covered. But under certain policies, it's covered except in the case of if you're carrying a baby for someone else. So there has to be a review of her insurance policy before we could work together. Or, you know, the other way to go with this is if you don't have someone lined up that you're interested in working with, they have a whole like database, I guess, of, I mean, I don't know if it's a large number or not, but almost like if you were adopting, that, you know, each surrogate has a profile and you match with them. And so prior to being approved, even to go into that database of potential matches, a surrogate would have to have that insurance review that, and then it will say either that her insurance does cover it, or right now there are affordable low-cost plans on the Affordable Care Act that you can get specifically for this. So what would happen is if her policy does not cover surrogacy, then we would have to purchase a policy for her during open enrollment in November. So let's see. So the law firm handles insurance review. They write up the contract. So whether, you know, the surrogate is collecting a fee or not, and kind of all of her expenses that we're responsible for covering, it's all set forth in the contract and the amounts. And then establishing parentage, like going before the court after the baby is born. And just because the presumption is if someone gives birth to a baby, that the baby is her own. So you actually have to go to court and, you know, like the kind of horror story that I started out talking about, like I presume that a judge would never say no to this. I guess it could happen, but I think it's a lot less likely here, you know, within the United States, that we're not, you know, some foreigners trying to take a baby out of the country and things like that. So, and all of the legal costs too of the surrogate, we're responsible for. As there's like, you know, pretty much she doesn't pay anything herself, and then there's also a stipend on top of like all of the costs that we're covering for her. And basically with all of these services, they can either provide them a la carte, where like they're charging for establishing parentage, the court procedure, they're charging for working up the contract, they're charging for the insurance review. Or you can do a package that includes everything. And I don't know what we're going to do. It does cost more, but it would be so, so nice to have those details just all taken care of. Like basically, the attorney was saying that the scheduling with the clinic, you know, for the embryo transfer and kind of, and, you know, the health workup for the surrogate, like all the medical appointments that would be taking place at the clinic where our embryos are. With the package deal, it's a law firm, but they're a surrogacy agency. The agency coordinates it versus us having to, like, you know, put our doctor in touch with the surrogate. So this is a hard enough process for me that I think it would be worth it. Hopefully we'll be able to afford it, to just have it taken care of, because I have a really hard time with not being in control. And already, I mean, this is part of the reason, like, I couldn't stop crying during the appointment, because, you know I would not be perfect during pregnancy. You know, there would be things that I eat that probably I wish I aren't as healthy for the baby and things like that. But to have my child in someone else's body, you know, I'm sure that she'll take good care. I'm sure that she will. But just not knowing, not being able to see, and this is totally on me. It's not a reflection on the other person at all. I have a very hard time with letting go of control of pretty much anything. And so I know already up front, this is not going to be easy for me. And so to kind of, you know, pay extra to just have things made easier Well, I guess it's a way of handing over control, but my point is that I think I'm going to be super annoying if I'm the one managing these details, and I'm probably going to drive her nuts, and probably she's going to wish she never worked with us. Not going to, not to like, hope she doesn't eventually. I mean, if she were to end up seeing this, I don't care, because being, whatever, I'm an open book, and, I want to have a relationship with her, but I know I drive, my husband crazy sometimes with how controlling I am, and I don't want to drive anyone else crazy, especially someone who's doing something so big for us. So having a go-between, I think, would be ideal for me. That's just my gut feeling based on the conversation today. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. They did say that if you're going through their wait list to get a match, like what I said with the registry and the profiles, like adoption, that it could be an 8 to 10 month wait for that. So it's actually not too bad. It's not like years. There are enough people signing up to be surrogates, pretty much to meet the demand without people having to wait too long. And the cool thing that they do actually is they can contact, obviously if someone's on the registry, that person is already is familiar or will be briefed on what's involved in surrogacy. But if you're working with someone like we hope to, they'll have the same kind of consultation with her, so she knows exactly what's involved. So that's cool, I think, just to know that she's been kind of briefed on the situation, and I just find that really helpful. So I think, the most difficult things to think about are, of course, what I talked about a minute ago with the genetic testing, and then also what happens in case the baby is lost, in case there's a miscarriage, and it's just becomes so like, it becomes kind of clinical. It becomes about the numbers, because I just wanted to know, like, okay, if this is the fee and the first embryo doesn't take, then are we basically, if we end up on our fourth embryo, are we paying the whole thing 4 times, or is it like a portion of it? So there's certain fees, like the agency is just paid once, and then depending on how long the pregnancy goes, certain expenses, certain, parts of the surrogate stipend are prorated. That's how it works. So like I said, it's kind of clinical to be thinking about things like this, and it feels just uncomfortable, kind of unnatural, but you have to think these scenarios through, because the worst thing in the world would be to be in this very sad situation and be completely unprepared. Like, at least working with this firm, we know that every eventuality is like covered in the contract, and there aren't going to be any surprises from the standpoint of like payment and like what happens now from a legal standpoint. Like, they have everything covered, and that's very comforting to me. So that's pretty much what we learned during the consultation. She really walked us through the process from start to finish, and I have to say the most moving part of it to me was, at the very end is when she goes like up to and through what happens in the case of a healthy birth, which is actually apparently the most likely outcome. As common as miscarriages are, apparently someone with a history of healthy pregnancies, would have less of a chance at that. And so with, most surrogates, they have a pretty good chance of it actually working out, which is just really wonderful to hear. But so she was telling us how, when it's time for the birth, like, we'll be there in the hospital. And that never really occurred to me. I never thought it through. And I don't know. I mean, of course I would love to be there for the birth of her child, but I guess I kind of thought that might be like a privacy thing with the birth mother, and then right after the baby is born is when we come into the picture. I don't know. I had no idea how this works. But she's like, no, you'll be there in the hospital. You'll have your own room. And like pretty much from the moment the baby is born, like it's all us. And you know, if the baby needs anything during the night, like we're the ones who call the nurses. And like that moment was just when I lost it, because I could picture so vividly us being there with our baby. And I don't know if it'll happen, but I really have this picture and I can feel it. And so that's what I'm hoping for and I'm praying for. So if you are still watching, you are probably someone who is considering using a surrogate, I would guess. So please, please send me an email. I would love to know your story and where you're at in the process, and tell me how you're feeling, because I know it is such a crazy thing, and you know, people want to hear about it, but they don't quite understand. You can't understand something until you've gone through something similar. So I would love to talk with you and just connect. My email should be with this video. And I really just, you know, I wish you the best on your journey. Even if you don't reach out to me, I want you to feel the love that I'm sending you with this video. It's a tough journey, but you have that inner strength to get through it. If you've come this far, I know that you're strong and you can do it, and you will find your happy ending.